Welcome to Idea Collider, a regular podcast hosted by me, Mike Rea, where I speak with the people who I regard as the most interesting within the pharmaceutical space, or I talk with the authors of the books that I've found most interesting on the subject of innovation. So enjoy.
I mean, if you want to get right into it, you know that I'm a scientist. I studied chemistry. I did my PhD in chemistry. And, I was fascinated by science. And, in my young age, I thought that's how you really move the world. You have to become a scientist. You need to understand everything, but then you are also able to have huge impact. And what was interesting is that, at university, when you do your PhD, you work really more on basic research, which was more the part you understand it and you contribute to another puzzle in science, but it's less of the things that you really have impact. I mean, I always said we create stuff that other poor students now have to understand. It was highly scientific and very advanced basic research, but it was basic research. And what I think felt I have a passion for is really to apply this science to something that can impact and really help other people or, make life easier or whatever. Yeah. So, and that's then when I decided that I really move into another industry, and I felt medicine and really pharmaceutical development I found very fascinating. And interestingly, at that time when I finished, it was really, there were so many students applying, this was really this time when there were hundreds and thousands of students, PhDs, trying to get a job. And so I applied at that time already at Novartis. And, what was different about me is that I also had a passion for arts and for dancing. Okay. And so I was a ballet dancer. I performed at stage, and I had my own dancing school. So I had a ballet school that I opened while I had my PhD. And I was wondering, should I put this into my application or not? And I said, no, then people think I'm not serious, if someone reads this. But then at that time, fiercely now husband said, that's differentiating you versus all these others. Put it in under others. Yeah. And guess what? That's how I was picked from a manager at Novartis. And he said, okay, can we talk? I'm also a PhD in chemistry. I know where you're at. So to be honest, you have no clue about what we are doing here, but you have high learning agility and we get you there. But let me talk about this dance studio. What did you do there? How did you do it? And so it was very successful. I was teaching during I did my lab time as a PhD student, and I explained to him how I did that. And then he said, you have to go to marketing. That's your place. That's where you have to go. But I tell you, you have to really start and understanding things. And that's why I ended up in field force, actually. Okay. And it was interesting that like student colleagues, they were like rolling their eyes and said, okay, that's what you do with your PhD. You go to field force. And I said, well, I had a good feeling. And I think they already see my second step. And why not? I'm, I think, by nature, a curious person. And I thought, okay, I want to go into more medicine and, pharmaceutical development. So if he tells me I need to start somewhere, let's do it. Yeah. And here we go. And then I had a classical career and had different steps. But it was probably really this, I always have these two pillars in myself, the science and the arts. And that's maybe why sometimes I look different as things than others potentially do. And I would not say it's always easy, but on the other side, it probably helped me in many situations.
Definitely, that's so interesting. Because I know in our book club we reviewed David Epstein's Range, which absolutely talks about those early years and how many different directions you could have taken.
Exactly.
Do you do the same with folks that you're recruiting now? Are you looking for diversity of approach or something special?
Yes. I mean, definitely, of course, there are certain requirements you look for, but I like if candidates come also with an unusual past or experience that we didn't have before, and I mean, because they bring different perspective. And I'm a true believer in diverse teams. It's not always easy for you as a leader. And, when you naturally see your tendency is that you kind of try to accompany yourself with the same profile. Mm-hmm. And that's the easy and the fun thing. But I think outcome will not be the best. And I truly believe that you need extroverts and introverts, and you need to hear everybody. So as a leader, what I always try to focus on is you have to make room also for the ones that are not the super fast one, but that are more the thinkers, the analytical people. You need to hear them, and that means you have to make room and give them space. And that's what I'm practicing. If you want a diverse team, you have to practice inclusivity and inclusiveness. You cannot just assume this will work out, and because the ones that are the louder ones, they will always shout the loudest, and that's the risk, and you have to be very aware of that, I believe.
Interesting. And maybe we'll touch on culture quite a lot. I want to look back before we do that to you starting as in the sales force, because that's an unusual skill to have in the bag when you get to the position that you're in now. Do you find that perspective useful in the role?
Absolutely. And I tell you, it was hard in the beginning, but I would have never want to miss it. And when you think now, a big part of my workforce that I lead is field force. And you have to understand what your people are doing, on the ground. And I really learned it. So what it will give you, it gives you humility. It also will tell you how you self-motivate yourself, that you, don't accept a no and try it in another way. And things like that. And that's something I appreciated, that I had the experience. And I understand what my people go through. I mean, when you think now in the pandemic, their role is to see physicians, go into hospitals, educate them, counsel. And now they were sitting at home from one day to the other, and you like almost your job is not existing anymore. Mm-hmm. And to help them, encourage them, find new ways, use digital tools, use other ways to get there. How can we support? What is now the most important is maybe support, is education about COVID and how to deal with cancer, things like that. And I understand in a way what they need. I wouldn't have done this if I would not have done it myself, I have to say. And it's humbling, and it's also grounding you. And in a way, it gives you also the insight to understand what your counterpart, our clients, our physicians, what they go through and what they experience. That's exactly why I find this so important. And actually, I was it was at that time a specialty line. It was called a specialty line at Novartis. And I had different hospital products. And there was one product that you also could use in cancer. And I remember, I worked in the eastern part of Germany, and their infrastructure was, not that well settled after the reunion. And I was sitting there, as a rep, in a room where patients were kind of connected to their chemotherapy. So it was all like open, and there were a few chairs where you could sit down. And I was sitting there with like 12 patients that were like there and got their chemotherapy. And I thought, you felt they were really sick, how they were talking to each other. I could listen, and I really felt uncomfortable. I said, what the hell are I doing here? They share their concerns and what they're going through. But it kind of triggered in me, okay, is there more we can do in cancer? This was for me such a moment where I said, okay, I can join forces with others, and maybe there's other ways to help them than this horrible chemotherapy. And what do they need? They need hope, they need encouragement, and they need good medicines at the end. And so that's why probably most of my career I was in oncology. I did also other things, but I always got back. It's quite interesting. And
Yeah.
that's where my passion is. Yeah.
Interesting. Now that I love that idea of sort of building resilience from the sales force, but also
Yes.
I remember trying to get a project done at a different pharma company where experiencing an infusion suite was part of
Yes.
what we were trying to get the product team to do, and there was such huge resistance to
Yes.
what could we possibly learn from spending 2 hours watching
Yes.
patients infusing our drugs. And to me it was exactly what you said, which is
Yes.
you might learn humility, you might learn an awful lot about the patient experience that you can't
Yes.
learn from a report.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, and when they were discussing and talking to each other, I found it was amazing. I mean, someone who himself was very, very sick tried to, encourage the person next to him and say, listen, and, it's only the first day and then you get over it and it's worth it. It's worth it. We are fighting the cancer. And I was impressed what energy still people have, and that they wanted to support each other, and this resilience I found impressive, but also very realistic. And there was so many aspects that you could see sitting there, and I was like there maybe half an hour, and then I got back several times, and later I had a little bit more courage and got then also to talk to them. But in the beginning I was more like completely overwhelmed and felt really uncomfortable that I'm sitting there and listening, but they didn't mind, and they were curious what I do, and it's amazing what kind of what conversations you have.
Fantastic. And then from those early days through your career to where you are, was it a straight path, or have you taken a kind of serendipitous path there?
Certainly, there were many steps where, I think you classically have your career that you go from field force into marketing, then you do global marketing, and then you start your first leadership positions. I mean, I probably at that time was one of the very privileged females that got offered great opportunities. I remember I was very young promoted to become general manager of a big unit at Novartis Germany. And it's interesting that I was so different at that time versus the other people sitting, in this conference room, or, the leadership team of that big country organization. And yeah, it has shaped me in a way that of course, you then question yourself, your leadership style, what you need to adapt, where you should stay true to yourself, how you can stay authentic and still be a good leader, be someone that's respected. That is the journey you're going through. And as I said, I was one of the very first females in such, big responsibilities. That's why I also see myself as someone who wants to encourage young females and do a lot of mentoring. I am a mother. I have a wonderful 18-year-old daughter. I am married to a wonderful husband who has also a career. So I was always quite proud to demonstrate that you can have a dual career, that your kid is not a complete jerk, and that you still can have a wonderful family life, and that it's all possible. That's a little bit probably my personality. But it was not easy, and then we made trade-offs between my husband and myself, moved 7 times, but always within Europe, because, then we could commute, we could arrange it. And so, of course, very interesting stages. I was many times, as I said, in leading commercial roles, but I also, one experience was that I became the head of investor relations for Novartis, which was very different perspective. Suddenly you deal with investors, with analysts, you talk about the share price, about financial metrics, and I think as a scientist, I mean, I could understand the things, and but I have to say what I realized there is it's important. I mean, if you want to lead a company, you have to understand this world as well. I mean, you're also responsible for shareholder return, things like that. It's important. But I realized how much I missed the being close to physicians, being close to science, being close to patients. So I did this for 3 years. It gave me unique learnings and views for my current role. But I remember at that time I said to our CEO, it was a unique learning. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, but now I know what I miss so much. And for any new role, I want to be back in business. And favorably, it is oncology. It is where my heart is. Yeah. And then I was the head of Europe for a while. I led a biotech that we acquired that does radioligand products, which is something, so radioactive medicines. Amazing. So I had this experience, and then I became a president of Novartis Oncology, which was very humbling that I was asked, and is something I really feel is a privilege and is a big honor still for me. And yeah, it's more that I have to hold the thing together. I think it all lives with these great people that we have. And that is also what I think as a leader, you have to be very aware of. It's not you. It's not about you. It's not at all about you. It's how to get the best out of your people. And I think what our role as leaders should be that they understand what is our purpose, what do we stand for, and what is our big dream, and then support them. That is my philosophy. And
and before we started recording, you were separating leadership and management, and clearly you've taught leadership a lot. How would you separate those two things in terms of your aspirations for the role?
I think management is clearly that you had to set up things like processes, governance. That's a given, and that's probably something you can easily learn. It's something that you have a lot of tools that people can tell you what to do to be a good manager. I think for leadership, you have to work on yourself. And that's the hard piece. To become a true leader, you need to be self-aware, and it's painful. I mean, we all want to be perfect, but everybody has areas for development, areas we're not good at, areas we're very strong. And I had the privilege to went through a lot of mentoring and coaching, and I think you have to allow this, and you have to buy in there. You need to know about yourself. You need to know where's your strengths, but also you need to know where you need to work on. I believe we are lifelong learners in the sense that it's really, you will never be perfect, and you have to accept it. It's hard for me. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, I have to say, but it helps you tremendously. It is really, in a way, makes you humble and makes you probably also vulnerable, which makes it probably more human for your people. They also understand, okay, it's okay that, not everything is perfect, as long as we know what we need to complement it, for example. And, as I said, a leader has a different role than a manager. A manager has to give objectives and metrics, and, as I said, provide the tools, the capabilities, and the processes. A leader has to bring inspiration. That's the big difference for me. Has to bring the inspiration and the purpose. I believe, and it's not only, I am in a way lucky. We want to save lives. We want to reimagine medicine. So we have a big purpose. But when you look at case studies, everybody can have a purpose. And that, I believe, you have to find as leader. What is it? What you stand for? So when a crisis comes, what is what you tell your people, And that's what you have to be able to crystallize.
Yeah, interesting. And how have you, any examples of how you dealt with the last 18 months of a crisis, particularly with regards to oncology, which presents significant challenges?
Yeah, that was interesting. At that time, I was still living in Italy, where, of course, the pandemic hits the hardest. And what for me was the most challenging, that I was the first also of the Novartis executive team being in lockdown. I thought I couldn't believe it. I was commuting every week, super easy. And then suddenly I'm the one grounded. So first of all, I felt like, oh no, I'm letting my team down. I'm letting my colleagues down. But then also, I was not too long in the role, just a year. And I have responsibility for more than 10,000 people. And you suddenly end up in your little home office and are supposed to lead 10,000 people. And it was for all of us, I'm sure for you to say, it was quite a shock. And I thought, okay, how do we get this done? And you know what I find, and that was probably more intuitive, I have to admit. Later, I realized that's how you should do it. But at that moment, it was really, we're facing a crisis. And I said, okay, to my team, the most important is we serve our patients. That's the most important at this point. That's what we stand for. That's our purpose. All the rest we will figure out. And I tell you, it helped my people to make their own decisions on what is really important now. And as you probably know, we have very, very innovative treatment approaches where you take the blood of a patient, you process their cells, and then send it back to them. This is life-saving for patients with lymphoma and leukemia. And you can imagine, so the blood of a patient that had huge hope on getting now cured potentially was sitting in the United States and the patient was sitting in Europe. And for us, it was like, no, we cannot let this person down. And, then suddenly from one day to the other, no planes were anymore flying. All the airlines were grounded. So I remember, and this is for us, it's a little box, we had to try to get this on big carrier flights where they have these huge amounts of things. And our team said, it doesn't matter, we have to get it there. So they even went by car to the airport, dropped the thing. And I think what I'm most proud, we did not miss one delivery of is also these very special things. But it was down to the commitment of my team. It was not me, but I think what I hopefully helped is to tell them what matters at this moment. We had no supply issues. We also then said for the field force, it's not appropriate to now run into hospitals and disturb physicians. They are in a crisis. The most important is that they save their patients. And unfortunately, cancer patients were the most vulnerable. Their immune system is down. So we really then said, okay, what do we know about viral infections and oncology? What do we know about COVID? We have all these scientists, and we completely repurposed what we did. We dropped basically all the rest and said, okay, let them help them educate. Let's share. I started peer dialogues with medical experts, and they shared how they try to, triage and how they try to manage handling their patients. You do things that we have never done before. And interestingly there was so much this underlying drive for helping patients, not letting them down, that there was tremendous innovation coming out of this period in record time, I have to say, in record time. Yeah.
So, and it often takes a crisis to produce that kind of invention, innovation. Do you see, going forwards, maybe artificially creating, challenges like that, or is there a way to take the learnings of that time forwards?
Yeah. I think what was for sure, as you probably know, we in Novartis, we embarked on a cultural journey. And what we want is really, we realized since a few years, the environment is changing fastly. How you develop pharmaceuticals has changed, how these treatments reach patients. There is new technologies that require new ways. And we said it cannot be, we cannot to get this done out of a boardroom. You need every associate. And we have so many talented people to contribute. And therefore we said we need to have a complete shift in culture. What we want to get to a culture that is inspired, curious, and unbossed.
Mm-hmm.
And unbossed is a word that we talk a lot about and many talk about, and it's good because it's raising this conversation. But what we actually mean is, first of all, on the leader side, is that we are servant leaders. So that means there is not this classical bosses sitting in their suits with the cigar, that's gone, but that we are really there to, in a way, remove obstacles. It's that we have to support our people, leverage what they can do best, and really support them. But it is also on the associate side that they have to step up. They can step up, but we also would expect them to take decisions if it's needed. And if it's in their scope, then they can go ahead with that. You get faster. But it's then also, especially to middle management, that we want to make sure that ideas are heard. That's exactly this joint innovation. This only comes if people are heard. If great ideas from a very junior person never come up to the top, you miss a big piece of innovation.
Yeah.
And that's something we embarked on for a while. And I think it has proven to be the right thing in the pandemic. I mean, people took responsibility. They were unbossed. They knew what they had to do. They didn't ask for the things they don't need to ask. And they just tried to be, they took calculated risks. They were transparent, also said where they struggle. And yeah, that confirmed to me we're on the right track. And a cultural journey and transformation is never done in like half a year with a change plan. It takes time. And that's for me one of the things where I thought, yeah, we have done the right thing and we have to continue fostering that.
Definitely. No, it's interesting because I first remember hearing the word unbossed, 4 or 5 years ago, and it's interesting how normalized that's become in the culture now. So, do you have a definition of innovation that you apply or think about? When you think about that as a concept.
Yeah, I mean, what I always say is that innovation sounds like a fancy word, and you have to always know why you need innovation. That's for me so critical. We don't do innovation for the sake of doing it or because it sounds fancy, but we do it for a reason. And that's why I always think if you want to drive innovation, you have to start with what is your purpose and what is really the problem you want to solve. I mean, in our case, we want to reimagine cancer. We want to find cures. That's what is the North Star. And that's why we drive innovation. And so therefore, for me, innovation, of course, when you think about our industry, it is about laboratory. It's about finding new medicines. But we learned in the last years that's not enough. I mean, innovation needs to also be applied to get these medicines to patients. And there is still inequalities. It's still, I mean, that's something we also fighting, that every patient that needs a medicine will get it finally. And for that also you need innovation. And that's sometimes underestimated, that people think innovation can come only in areas like whatever, creative spaces or science. But I tell my people this can come from finance and from legal and from everybody. So for me, innovation is more, how I would define it, is the way how you look at things, how you approach problems, and how you create solutions. It's more the how for me. It's really the problem statement or the mission or your North Star. And then how do you get there? That's for me innovation. It's less this kind of, oh, now we have a great idea. And the second thing that I always say, and my team is already like, oh no, now again, is also for me, innovation is only true innovation if it gets implemented. So it can be a lot of great ideas that are not implemented. And I said, then we have our mission not completed. So we need ideas and innovation that is kind of implementable, that is at the end giving you the outcome you want, that you look for. And that's for me what has to go together in my view.
And with that in mind, do you approach it as a kind of active process? Is there a time set aside for it, or is it just part of a kind of cultural approach?
It's much more of a cultural approach that because we have tried these things, also do idea sessions or set up time, but then still it takes time until you get there, and it's always very much focused on one thing, one event. But as I said, especially over the last 5 years, the world is moving so fast that you basically need daily innovation. You need to have people think differently, be flexible and agile, and tackle things just in different ways. And therefore, it should be a daily, it should be embedded in your culture. And that's what I said. That's why for us, the cultural transformation is important, because especially young employees and young associates, they come with super great ideas. They are not biased with the experience and that, that's how we have done it for 20 years. And I love this fresh mindset. But you also need the experience sometimes to say, well, this is what we try, and this is maybe not so good idea. And to mix this, that's where then you have your true innovation and your new really ways of finding solution.
Interesting. And do you try to measure it? Is it part of the year on year? Is there any way of keeping track of whether you're getting more of what you want?
So actually, I don't measure. I think, at least in my view, to measure innovation is not getting you the right outcome. I mean, we don't want to collect ideas, like to say now we are probably 500 new ideas, how we do this process. I really look at the outcome and how we got there. And that's how I see how things are moving. So the pandemic was a perfect proof. There you could see what people came up with: telemedicine, home monitoring apps, things like that, where before we said it's not possible. You cannot have an EKG on your iWatch and then get a medicine, prescribed just because we do this at home. It all worked. And therefore, for me, I measure outcome. And for me, innovation is really an integral part of how we work. It's not something where I say we put this aside and that's we count ideas. Or for me, it has to be embedded, and it's something that should come natural. It should not be like, now we do innovation. And it's also coming from asking a lot of questions. This is why we, in our culture transfer, we have the curiosity in. And that's what you have to practice lifelong, that you stay curious and that you listen to different perspectives. And that, I think, will drive it.
Fantastic. And I'm interested, actually, because you sit in Europe, whether you have a view on the kind of the US-Europe kind of culture, whether you get more of something from the United States, or more of it from Europe, or is there? How do you see those two cultures interacting?
Well, I think we are truly global, and that's also something that even was more kind of strengthened with the pandemic, where now the world was really global. It didn't really matter where you sit. You come together on one time point and find solutions. And I have to say, it's maybe some of the approaches are a little bit different, but people get it. And I think on both sides of the Atlantic, people are keen again to drive this output, and they want to find cures ultimately for cancer. And that's why you don't see such a big cultural, I think, difference. What I probably see is, I think when you look at the United States, there is probably more risk-taking in a sense that people are more bold, they're willing to get in more bold. While maybe the Europeans are more like, okay, we pilot, we test, we go on next one. And it's different approaches which come, and you have to just put this together, where then the bold ones say, listen, why don't you go at a bigger scale? Already the idea is great, and while the others say, listen, maybe you want to step back and test it before, then we can learn, and then we can go with a better idea. And I think what you have to try is that these different views are injected, into the team spirit. And that's how I try to leverage.
That's really interesting, and I'm also interested in how you might compare and contrast oncology with other therapeutic areas. It's I think it's one of those things where clearly early phase in oncology is very different than early phase in some other diseases. But with the perspective that you've had, do you see oncology, development, commercializing, being different than other therapy areas in terms of innovation?
What I see is that we are certainly we take more risks, and we have to take more risks because we are in a life-saving space. I mean, patients don't have options, and you have to be always very responsible. I mean, we can still not sacrifice safety or whatever, but when you look at the phases of drug development, very often in oncology, with your phase 2, where you go already at a defined dose to patients, you can save many lives, and patients just, they want new options. So you have to, of course, plan careful. And what is the challenging thing in oncology, that you always start late. That means for us, that means you try to give them hope and a new option to patients that are very advanced. So that's in a way also the psychological kind of component we sometimes deal with that you probably don't have in other areas. That also we have a lot of hope, when there is a new product, we have good phase 1 data, we all hope. And when you have these single arm trials, of course you don't know the names and the people, but we know every bar on our curves is an individual. And you so much hope that more are on the upper side, that they live longer, their cancer is shrinking. And it's something we have to deal with constantly, that there is this high hope and then there's disappointment. And but I mean, that's why I tell my team we have to be very responsible. I mean, at the way we cannot create false hope. We have to be sure that there's a rationale, we see enough data. But on the other side, then still, you see how thankful and grateful people are to get enrolled. And therefore, we have a huge responsibility, but also the opportunity to really have impact. And then when you see there certain results, then you move into earlier lines. And that's also very different than in other disease areas. There you start the other way around. You don't start with the most difficult patients. Yeah, and then what is probably for us is also this lifelong learning, that usually then oncology drugs get registered with only smaller data packages, but in later lines, and then you work your way through. So for us, bringing a product to the market is only the beginning. It's not the end, Then we do development while we still go. We learn a lot. We add combinations. We do a lot of data and evidence creation. So that's the interesting part. That's also, of course, for me as a scientist, that we never stop. It's not like this product is now ready and can only be commercialized. We do development until really the end of the life cycle of a product.
Interesting, yeah, and I guess probably the last compare and contrast question is really how you see maybe the cultures of biotech. Some of your partners versus the kind of the 10,000 people who you have. Are there things to learn from biotech, or where do you see the advantages of a large pharma company these days?
Yeah, certainly. Of course, we work, as you say, a lot with biotechs. What I like is their focus on one area, their clear commitment, and then taking risk. They are willing to take a lot of risk. And that's what I tell my team we have to apply as well. And that's what we are up against, where I said, listen, if we are too conservative, then a little biotech will overtake, and they come first with the innovation. So we have to keep this spirit of really being focused, but then in these areas, being where we are focused, be also bold. So take more bets, be fast, and have not the 100% solution. What I think a big company can bring, if you have the spirit, and that's very important, is think about the creative potential that we have. That is amazing. The talents we have, the diverse views. And if we find a way to really surface that and leverage that, that's unique. And that 300 people cannot do versus 10,000. But as I said, you have to work hard for that. You have to make sure that everybody's listened. I mean, I engage a lot with associates of any level. I do a lot of coffee talks, things like that. I have to say I started in the pandemic because I wanted to just be approachable and that people see me while I was stuck in my home office. And I have to say it's a great practice that you talk to different people. You also bring them together. So we do more on a first come, first serve base. And these slots are filling up in like 2 minutes. But what I then have is people of different levels, different generations, different functions, from finance, legal to science, commercial. And it's amazing the conversations we have. I never put an agenda. Of course, I have an idea where I want to go, but I really let it free flow. That's how I learn. And that's also how they learn from each other. And then you see what's on people's mind, what do they need, is there ideas? And of course, I mean, I'm not naive. I cannot, cover the whole 10,000, but I see now a lot. My direct reports start doing that. Others do that. And I think that's what you need. You need this dialogue across the organization and not in hierarchies, not in silos. And this will stimulate new ideas. I have no doubt.
Definitely, and the first time we met at the round table, I was struck by your sort of depth of perspective on the issues of diversity. So clearly, there's diversity of opinion within your team. Diversity has been a subject that's raised its head in the pandemic, and certainly in oncology. Do you have a kind of North Star for how things might change next to R&D and oncology development?
I mean, absolutely. And you saw this again, that in the pandemic, there is certain groups in the population that were completely disadvantaged. And I think that's not acceptable. And unfortunately, you see the same in cancer. For example, we have a foundation in the US and we have started a program to eliminate inequalities for breast cancer patients, because it's the same there. Diagnosis, for example, for Black population is completely late. They don't get the same, care than others get. And I said, this is completely unacceptable. And that's where we work on. It starts with how we do clinical trial, because you always go to your same centers. They have maybe a certain bias for some patients. And I think it's our obligation that you have data for every population and every different group. But then you also have to make things available. And therefore, we're now spreading what sites do we go, what centers. How can we make sure that we have a fair representation of different population? And I think it is a long journey. It will take a while, but you have to start with a commitment, and then you have to work against it. And I mean, the second part of huge inequalities, I mean, we are all lucky. We live in countries with very developed healthcare systems, and we might often complain, but still we get a good coverage. And when you look at then some markets where they don't even have the basics of therapies, cancer is not diagnosed, and that's for me devastating. I mean, my mission is not done if I save patients in the US and in Europe. That cannot be. And that's something where we also work on innovative models. You have to have the courage and engage, have these discussions, and find ways to really also change, the narrative there. And that's why there is a North Star for me. The North Star is that we find cure for cancer patients for everybody who needs it, wherever he or she lives. That's really the half sentence that matters a lot. Yeah.
Fantastic. And where I've got some, personal questions coming, do you see that as a 5-year journey, 10-year journey, 20-year journey? What do you see as your personal North Star in 5 years' time?
If you look at the moment at research and science, it's a huge progress. I mean, what we can do for cancer patients. So I always tell my team, I'm long in the business since 20 years, and we were never that close. So, but it's usually, then the home run, and it's the last stretch that is the toughest. When you climb a mountain, it's the uphill battle at the end. That's probably where we are. And I think if we work hard and really believe in our dreams, we get closer and closer and closer. And I don't know if we make it to the top in 5 years, but I think we can get to a fair part, and that's what I fight for and dream for. Probably we will never solve it completely, but I mean, encouraged by the progress that has been made the last 5 years, I think we could get there. And it's a joint thing. It's not only me, my team. You have to work with many, many. That's what I also say. I think there's times where saying your knowledge is exclusive for you and your organization. These times are over. We have to be willing to share. If you want to achieve something big, you have to have the courage to also share, and at the end, look at the pandemic. It's at the end not the first inventor of the vaccines. It's the ones that collaborate and get it out to the patients. That is the ones that at the end make the impact. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we've got a great sense of what's always driven you personally. Clearly, there's an energy that's rare. Is there something that you would pin down and say, look, this is what this is what gets me up in the morning and drives me? Is it is it inner energy? Is there is it the purpose? Is there one thing you can point to?
I think it's definitely the purpose, and as I said, that we are so close now that now is the time where you see science advancing. We make so much progress on new technologies. Now is the time. Now we need the energy. Now we need to be there fully present. And, for me, probably what drives me is that I always say, if I would ever be 80, what would I look for? And it's probably the impact I could have made on cancer patients. And that's something that drives me. My daughter is always worried what I will do for retirement. She said, "Oh, Mommy, I cannot see you ever. Please find something." And it's probably still this purpose will be there. And that gets me moving, I have to say.
Fantastic. I always end on a book question. So, do you have books that you'd recommend that have been part of who you are today, or that you'd recommend to others on the journey?
Yes, I see your beautiful bookshelf, and in my other room, I have also a bookshelf behind, and I read a lot. So in my private time, I don't read science, and I don't read also anything about management and leadership. I try to completely distract. And of course, as I love arts, I love great writers. Actually, one book I always recommend is from a chemist, an Italian chemist that is a wonderful writer. It's Primo Levi. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
And he has written a book, The Periodic Table. I mean, what can you for a chemist? And I read it when I was in my studies in university, and I found it fascinating. It's super well written, and it's about his life. But he put it like with chemical elements, like first chapter starts with argon, this is a gas, and then, he goes through the elements and he talks about his life journey. And that's probably what tells a lot about me, this kind of combination of arts and science. You can be a chemist, but you also can be a writer. And I found this wonderful how this is structured. And there's probably a new recommendation that I was just reading last year. It's from a lady called Leticia Colombiana, and it's The Braid. I don't know if you heard about this book.
No.
It's the stories of 3 wonderful, powerful women that got somehow connected via this braid. I don't spoil it. And it's 3 women that are kind of role models that stand for their purpose. There is cancer involved as well, and it's a book that I think I was reading it in one go. We were on vacation, we were on the seaside. I was reading. I skipped lunch, I skipped dinner, And it's a wonderful book, I have to
Wow.
say, and I can only recommend it. And it's
Wow.
an easy read, but a very inspiring one.
Yeah, well, I'll go find that one straight away. Thank you. Susanne, is there anything that you wish that I had asked you before we close? And anything that you wanted to be able to say that I forgot to address?
No, I think we covered all aspects. What is important to me is really leadership, how you build diverse teams. I mean, my North Star, as I said, is reimagine medicine, finding cure for cancers. And I mean, when we met, I did this speech about innovation, and what I closed with was really my big dream is that at some point, cancer in oncology is a chapter in a medicine's book, but it's not anymore this unsolvable problem. And that's where I want to contribute. I try to do my best, and I encourage many others to work on it. And I think jointly we will get there at some point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your inspiration and for the time on today's chat. Susanne, I'm guessing easiest for people to find you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much.
I'm curious to hear about feedback, about thoughts, what people think themselves about innovation, about finding cures.
We should open up the comments, absolutely, and,
exactly.
and keep the conversation going. But no, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for reaching out, Mike, for being curious and for being bold and reaching out.
Thank you, Susanne.